Oh, there we go. Okay.
It's all your fault. The world's going to crap.
Okay, so picking up where we left off, we're just starting now. The topic of discussion, because we have forgotten, it's come a long time ago here, drum roll please, is feminism and Judaism. Feminism and Judaism. So we are going to look at some very broad and very specific ideas in the topic of feminism. We're going to look at the history of feminism, what the position of Judaism and the Torah is about women, and how the two relate to each other, how we see things in terms of what feminism means, and then we'll look at complaints of Jewish feminists and how they can be answered by the values and the discussions that we're having about how the Torah views women and women's role in the world, right? So the last time, just to give a very brief review of the last class, which was the first class, we went back, and again, I'm using two books as sources for this class. One is called Feminism and Judaism. I can't believe it's sitting on my desk at home, but I don't remember the author's name. I'll bring it the next time. We started looking at, we talked about the historic. The other one is male and female. He created them. I'll get the authors' names for you next week. Mir Hashem. So we looked at, historically speaking, what has been world attitudes, the philosophical attitudes towards women. And we looked at ancient Greece and ancient Rome, and there, of course, we had their view of women was very denigratory, if that's a word. Woman was seen as a lesser being. I mentioned the myth to you that Zeus created woman in anger as a punishment for man. That doesn't bode well, right? Exactly. Doesn't bode well for her value in terms of being on this earth. Yeah, exactly. She was meant to be a vicious trap for men. She would attract men, but she would also harm them. And Aristotle saying that women were their only value was to perpetuate the species. They had but they're weaker creatures. They're passive in the act of creation. They are weaker creatures, passive, accepting the powerful seed of the man. In Greek and Roman culture and society, women were also very much at a disadvantage. They were at the whim of their male relatives, first the father, then their husband, even their brothers or children or sons, and had very few rights. Could be tossed around, could be given away by a husband to his friend, could be willed to someone else, right? So they didn't really have a very good social standing either. Okay, so the idea that women were lesser creatures definitely goes back to almost the beginning of time, as it were, to recorded time history. Of course, we're going to see that Judaism and the Torah have always had very different ideas about the status of women. We're going to get to that today. But then we talked about women in Christianity, right? And this is a really major topic, and we spent a little more time on this because Christianity, of course, has been basically the foundational sort of not only theology of the Western civilization, but also the foundational philosophical underpinnings of Western civilization started with Christianity. So therefore, what Christianity has to say about women's position, women's roles, women's nature and character carries very strongly into how she was seen in Western civilization and how she was treated, and laws, that were created to deal with her, to deal with the issue of the woman. And we talked about how Paul, in creating the religion of Christianity, really broke away from Judaism and wanted to specifically create this new entity, new values, new interpretation of the Torah. This is where we get into the view of women, because Paul looks at the creation story of a man and woman, right, as well as what happens in the Garden of Eden with the sin, and he makes interpretations that are not essentially inherently in any way essential to the Torah itself. It's not compatible with our view and understanding of what happened. So, for example, Paul he sort of fixes on the text verse that says God created man in his image. In the image of God, he create him. And he says, meaning, Paul says this means the man is the one that was created in God's image. Woman was not. All right. And he, of course, ignores the next part of that verse, which we'll get to a little bit later, that talks about them, man and male and female. But that's his interpretation. So therefore, what comes from this is, well, she's a lesser creature. She is not as divinely inspired. She's not as imbued with the divine spark as much as man is, and therefore she is not. And therefore he is Lord over her. Right. So quote Paul: "The head of a woman is the man. For a man indeed ought not to cover his head, for he is the image and glory of God. But the woman is the glory of man." So he removes woman from God in a way. He's saying, here's man, here's God, there's man, and there's woman. So in a sense, he's taking out the divinity, the divine essence of the human being is removed from woman, basically. She's going. The divine spark is reflected only through man. Whatever she can get from that, it has to come through man because she is lesser than man. Okay.
And who said this?
Paul, yeah, the head honcho. Yeah.
The Mormon church is really very much in line with this in a big way.
Okay, I'm not familiar with Mormon theology, so that's interesting to note. Okay, so that was the idea. In addition to that, he reads the story of the Garden of Eden, of Gan Eden, as the failure of a woman to live up to God's word, or really her husband's word. Paul puts all the blame of the sin on the shoulders of Chava, on Eve. It's her. First of all, she has an innate weakness because she was not born of the same stuff as man, and so therefore she was easily led astray by the snake, and which leads her to disobey God's prohibition and give Adam the fruit, and thereby condemning them to death, to exile. So Paul says it was not Adam who was deceived and became a transgressor. It was the woman who broke God's law, right? Paul also connects the idea, the Christians connect the idea of Chava's sin with sexuality, with a temptation. There was some element of sexual temptation in her sin. So therefore, now woman is now associated with not only sinning and weakness, but also evil physical lust and temptation.
How do you connect a snake with sex?
Well, actually, our Meforshim, our commentators, do say that the snake's seduction and temptation of Chava was of a sexual nature.
Snake? Mm-hmm. That's pretty far out to understand that.
Well, again, it's in the Midrash. It's a Midrashic interpretation, and the snake was. Again, you have to remember that the snake was a figure very different from the one that we know today.
What did the figure look like?
Well, he walked on two legs, as man did, right? He could speak to her. So this was a different sort of creature, and again, his goal was the what? Yeah, it's a different kind of creature. So it's it is harder to understand. It's true. But Paul, what Paul does with that story is say that Chava's temptation of Adam, when she gave him the fruit, was really tempting her with her physical wiles, beauty / whatever you want to say about it. So therefore, the idea of sexual relations in Christianity became associated with sin. And this is why you have the inherently sinful.
Didn't seem to have an impact in it.
Well, no, because
on civilization.
I don't know about that, because what happened, of course, from that led to the idea that marriage was only now a way of sort of boxing in your physical lusts, which really are bad to begin with. We don't have that idea, but they do, right? So marriage was seen as the lesser of two evils. And what it also does, what it also did was separate the idea of holiness and physicality. We don't separate those ideas. But Christianity said, here in this box is divinity and spirituality and your soul. And here in this box is your physical body, your lusts, your desires, all of that. And the two don't go together, they said. The two don't go together. So anything now that is related to physicality, marital relations, the beauty of the union, what we know is the beauty of the union between a husband and a wife, is now tainted with this idea of sin. And okay, we're going to give you this marriage. We're going to give you a marriage. But really, what is that doing? We're saying if you must give into your lusts, all right, at least here we'll give you something that makes it less bad. That's the way they saw marriage. Paul said it's better for man to be alone, and even Luther, yeah. And even Luther, much later, Martin Luther said that compared the sexual act with leprosy. Was it leprosy or epilepsy? Sorry, epilepsy. So there was some sickness, a sickness that is that he said the union is so hideous and frightful a pleasure that physicians compare it with epilepsy or falling sickness. And he said intercourse is never without sin. So there was this foundational belief that somehow we have to separate the physical part of our lives from the religious or spiritual. We don't have such an idea. We never did. But therefore, because woman is represented, she sort of represents this physical element in the world. She is a manifestation of man's lust, right? An object of his lust, and therefore a representative of that lust. And therefore, in the Christian worldview, she became the receptacle for all that was evil. She became the standard or the symbol of everything that was sinful, going back to Eve. Did you want to say something?
Yes. Although I grew up in this town, it was Christian dominated, and although there were many wonderful, warm, and fine Christians that I knew, I and many other women have suffered greatly from these teachings that even today are very influential. So what Kaya is telling you is really very accurate and has really informed a lot of Western thinking even up through today.
Okay.
I don't have a problem with that.
Yeah, okay.
Did you think I had a problem with that?
No, I did not think you had a problem.
Okay.
I was just bringing something.
Here are Paul's words on marriage. If you cannot restrain your desires, it is better to marry than to burn with passion. So if you're going to give in to your lusts, all right, don't burn in hell about it. Get married instead. But
in Christianity, the whole point of intimacy is procreation.
I think they would say that, okay, it's probably two sides of that coin. One is it's a way of sanctioning your lusts, or at least not going to hell for them. And the other side would be to procreate the world, which is what God said. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There are now more, even among more conservative Christians, they say that it also promotes a bonding between a husband and wife. They have come to this place where that also is okay. Right. But
I'm going back.
All Christians believe that.
That's a whole big breakaway from this.
Yeah. Right, exactly. I'm going back to the origin of these ideas because, again, they formed really the foundation of how the Christian world viewed women. And, it really was an association between woman and a sinner. So woman became the symbol of sinning, And again, I'm making this point to then break away from it and to show you the distinction between the Torah's view, right? The church fathers continued this. We have prescriptions to, hide woman should go and hide her beauty because she should be ashamed of and try to prevent more sin, right?
Wait a minute, who said that?
This was Tertullian.
And he's a Christian.
He was a founding father of
So I
Christianity.
don't recall the scenes or pictures or anything of women hiding their beauty.
No, I don't know how
I think
literally
people-
they took it. I don't know how
Yeah.
practically they implemented it.
Okay.
Right?
I kind of think it wasn't so implemented.
I doubt it. It was probably more a didactic point,
I'm wondering though, because he said this centuries and centuries ago. So there
Right.
may have been a time at that time where
Right.
women were hiding.
right. But and then you had other people saying other things. Man rules over woman. Women were given like all the creatures under man's dominion. We're going to get to that pasuk, that verse in a little bit later. Women ruined everything. They have a greater inclination to sin because they're weaker creatures by nature. Augustine also said, a man has to love his wife, but there's a conflict. How can you love something that's evil? So he said, a good Christian loves the fact that she is human and hates the fact that she is a woman. In the same way that a Christian is told to love your enemies, you love the fact that they're human, you hate the fact that they're doing evil. That's his attitude. Jerome even said a woman should become a man. That's her highest calling, that she can really work her way up the evolutionary scale and become a man. That's her highest praise, would be to be called a man. So again, you had woman was associated with sin, original sin of Eve, and which translated into sexual sin and filth, and as a result, of course, of their sin. So what this translated to in more practical terms is you raised that question of how did they, where we didn't really see, where do we see this actually in practical terms? The woman was considered her husband's subservient, servant. She had to have total subservience to her husband. And I think that if you read any number of, you read English novels of the 17th, 18th century and 19th century, if you read history or historical accounts, diaries, you will see that there is this prevalent idea that the woman is just a silly creature who is good for nothing but sewing, not even making dinner, but maybe raising the children a little bit. She's not supposed to do too much, according to Paul. We'll see in a little bit, but Paul says that they should keep quiet. They shouldn't be teachers. There should be utter obedience. And this idea of utter obedience to your husband was something I think that was very, it permeated the relationships between husbands and wives. Think about law. Think about women in the law. They weren't able to own property. That's different from Jewish law, right? They weren't able to, they didn't have any rights over their children. The father owned the children even after a divorce. In the Middle Ages, scientists came up with quote unquote scientific theories as to women's defectiveness. It was said that they had a higher liquid content, and because of this higher liquid content, they were less constant. They were curious. They were moving about more, and that was therefore this explained their lack of fidelity. I think women are not loyal creatures. Thomas Aquinas said women were defective men. They were accidents, and they were born of accidents in male sperm.
Who said that?
Aquinas.
Oh my.
He said the mother supplies the formless matter of the body. So why were they created? For the sole purpose of procreation. All right, that's what their job here is on earth. The woman, so therefore her weakness and lesser intellect and spirituality makes them unfit to even raise their own kids. For the woman needs the man not only for generating and educating the children, but also as her personal master. For the man is of more perfect reason and stronger virtue, right? Okay. So, and again, as I mentioned, Luther and the Protestant Reformation also had this idea. He did make a break from the traditional Catholicism, and he did believe that marriage benefited not only a couple and not only the family, but also communities in general in the world. But he still thought that sex was inherently sinful, and every union is, as I said, compared to, we cannot make, he quote, we cannot make use of woman without the horrible passion of lust, and so to speak without epilepsy. So now you have this idea of physical union between a man and woman is sinful, it's shameful, and now it's disease, basically.
It's interesting also that he talks about making use of women.
Right, exactly. They are creatures to be made use of. So, practically speaking, that was Luther. Excuse me. You talk about practicality. How did this mindset permeate the actions and practical attitudes towards women? Look at the witch hunts. That's not such a stretch to think that if you're starting from the basic philosophy that women are somehow sinful and evil and weaker, that they're easy, it's not hard to go to that, from that to the idea that they are much more likely to be tempted by evil and the devil. They are more like, the devil comes into the house and he's going to go for your girls first because they're the weaker creatures, right? So it's really a very small jump from that to say, women are the witches. They were tempted by the devil and now they're acting on their behalf. And, the witch hunt is perfect. Again, in law, the laws made women legally subordinate to their husbands well into the 20th century. Again, men had the right to inflict corporal punishment. And this is talking about Europe. We're talking about Europe, not any other culture, but Western culture. It was their duty to keep their wives on the straight and narrow. He had the right to beat his wife. That law was not rescinded until 1891. The right to beat your wife if you so decided that she needed physical corporal punishment. A married woman gave up her possessions to her husband. Now we have this similar idea in Judaism, but we also have flexibility in that a woman and her husband can decide together how their finances will be ordered, meaning she can decide to keep all her money and not give them to her husband, in which case he's not required to support her as well, and things change. But in terms of, there was flexibility in the marriage contract in that way. There isn't any here in secular culture, Christian culture. Public sale of wives in England was very common. It wasn't legal, but it was common. Excuse me. And even into the 20th century, there were reports of this being done. And it was done as a way to take care of debts, personal debts. Family had personal debts. One way to solve it, I'll give you my wife. She's now yours. She's now yours. And it was done. It was legal, but it was done. What?
It's a win-win.
Win-win for the man, exactly. Right. So, and she would actually be led around by a halter around her neck, taken away. And it was done in the public square, auction or sale. It was amazing. So there were actual practical repercussions to this mindset, that viewed women as, and look, of course they didn't have the right to vote until the late 20th century. So now let's look at what the Torah has to say about women, right? And again, we're starting from the premise that the Torah has a completely different view of women, completely different view. We're going to start by going back to the beginning again, as well as, right, Paul did it. We're going to do it as well. We're going to go back to the very beginning, the verses in Bereshis, in Genesis. And let's look at the verses that Paul actually mangled and selectively quoted from, and see what the Torah says, and see what our commentators say, and see what our understanding is of these verses and how they contribute to our understanding of women. So, quote, "So God created man in his image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them." All right, that's the first verse. And then the next verse, another verse goes, "God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, the bird of the sky, and every living thing that moves on the earth." Okay, those two psukim we're going to talk about now. So Rashi comments, he says, when the pasuk says male and female, he created them, saying that what the pasuk is telling us is that both man and woman were created on the same day. Okay, now it's interesting because all the other creatures of the earth were also created male and female when they were created. So why are we going out of the way here to point out that Hashem created man and woman, male and female? Rav Hirsch says it's to make the point that both male and female were created by God in his likeness with equal divinity. All right, so we do believe that there was an equal amount of divinity given to man and woman, okay? And this is also brought out by the seeming contradiction in the pasuk, right? So the pasuk says he created man in his image. All right, so there you could say Paul, all right, something that he saw, he created man in his image. So where's woman? If we're saying that they were both created in his image, where's woman? So the pasuk goes on to say, male and female he created them, right? So God created man in his image, in the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. This is the same pasuk. So it's a little contradictory, right? Because in the same verse we're using him and them. So in addition, in the next verse, God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, right? So if he only created man, who's the them? There's a little bit of a question here. Who's them? Okay. Now, again, we may remember from our discussion on, which topic was it? Our topic of mitzvahs ona, that they were created as one original androgynous creature, right? When Adam was created, when God created the first human being, it was a male-female creature. That was one being, and they were back-to-back, male-female, but one creation, all right? This is how we would explain the pasuk's dichotomy, using him and them. It was a him and a her and a them, all in one, okay? So from this perspective, woman is also clearly included in the designation of being created in God's image, right? There's no sense of a lesser being of a female. There's no sense that she's lacking in any way, shape, or form what God instilled in a man, okay? In fact, we have further proof of this in the word that God chooses to use to describe the woman, which is ha-isha, the woman. Commentators say that that term indicates her tremendous stature, that it is a word of honor and of position. It indicates a high stature. After the sin, by the way, after Chava and Adam sinned, she's renamed. Right? She's not called Chava, Eve. She's not called Chava till after the sin, and that name indicates her new role in life. So Chava means mother of all life, right? Chava is a life giver, mother of all life. That's her new role in life. Okay. Previous to the sin, however, she doesn't have that name because that was never her intended role. Her role changed because of the sin. Before the sin, she was not intended to be a mother. She was not intended to mother. She was intended to walk side by side with her husband and do the work, his and her work on earth. Remember, she's created as an ezer kenegdo, as a helper opposite him, or against him. But
who's going to raise the kids?
Okay, so you could say both. You could say, but the point is that as a nurturer, she wasn't intended to be the primary nurturer. Now, as a result of her sin, that's part of the corrective. That's part of her penalty or her penance. Is that she has to nurture.
How do you know
this?
What she was intended to do. Like, where is that?
These all come from the Midrash. In other words, part of our oral Torah. We, I guess it's worth saying every once in a while that the oral Torah, as given to us, we believe that it was given to us alongside the written Torah, right? So when we have the psukim here, the pasuk, it's almost impossible to actually understand a lot of the Torah. It's impossible to understand nearly all of it without the accompanying oral law. And we believe that we were given that alongside, and that oral law was transmitted orally, obviously, until it was finally written down much centuries later, because it was going to be lost in the diaspora of the Jews, and so therefore it was written down in the Mishnah, and then again in the Gemara. Okay, so all these midrashim, all these little background details that we know from the oral law, the oral Torah, which again we believe that God taught to Moshe and he taught to Yoshua. We have that famous saying in the beginning of Perkei Avos, Moshe kibel Torah Sinai. Moshe received the Torah from Sinai, and again that means oral and written. And then he transmitted it to Joshua, who transmitted it to the elders, etc., and so on throughout the centuries. Yeah.
This doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
It doesn't?
No.
What doesn't make sense?
The idea that her role would not be it doesn't. I mean, the woman of valor. Mm-hmm. She can do all those things, and she's still a mother.
Right. The Woman of Valor is a poem that is praising the woman as she exists and existed at the time. In other words, any woman after Chava's sin is a different creature than Chava. That's what we're talking about. That's what we're saying.
Is a different creature than
a different
Woman of Valor?
Yes. In other words,
The Woman of Valor is pre-sin.
No.
I mean, pre-snake.
No. The Woman of Valor is actually a poem by Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon. Supposedly, and we understand that he wrote this about his mother Bathsheba. But he is also, of course, referring to the ideal general woman, Jewish woman. Mm. But it is a woman that existed and has always existed since Chava. And what is she being praised for, by the way? Do you remember some of the elements of his praise? Huh?
Good buyer.
A good businesswoman,
yeah.
A good, a kind-hearted, and giving tzedakah. Yeah. All of the truth is, I mean, really, I doubt that we could say that anything that he's discussing as praising of the woman was very different from what Chava was in her personality. We're just saying that her role was different, that her job on earth was different. In other words, her intended job, as God foresaw it, as he saw it, was to walk alongside Adam and to become, to perfect the world in the same way that he did. After the sin, what happened was their roles broke off. He became he had to go and work the fields, right? Right? Beforehand, he didn't have to. Everything was easy. Before the sin, there was no toiling the fields for Adam, and there was no pain in childbirth or raising kids for Chava. Right? Part of their punishment was now that Adam has to work the fields. He has to actually work for his bread, which he didn't have to do before. That's how his role became different. And her role became different, that now she has to have pain and suffering during the mothering process. So it was originally envisioned as they're walking hand in hand doing the same exact work. And now that they sinned, their roles are split off. So they have the same value, internal value, divine value, etc. But now their roles are going to be different. That was part of the punishment. Yeah.
A little problem with the concept. They're individuals. They both have the spark of God. This is before the snake. Why do they have to go hand in hand? Why can't they go? He go this way, she go this way. They meet for dinner. I mean, why? Is it still a little subservient, it sounds to me? She's got to go with him, by his side.
No, but
why can't he go by her side?
Oh, he does. That was the point, is that they were completely equal. No, that's the point. Side by side, meaning on the same level. She's not behind him.
Okay.
She's not anywhere except right next to him. Again, remember that they are two halves of one coin. When they were originally one creature, when they were separated, now there's two halves of one whole. So how do they get back together? How do they reunite, as it were, through marriage and through the physical union, which we talked about and we'll get to also. But now they have again, they are, and as well, we learned that their souls are also cut in half. When they were bisected, their souls were bisected as well. So they are really partners in the deepest sense. They can't live without each other. Our tasks here now is to reunite with that other half of my soul and to do the work that we're meant to do. Again, after the sin, that became two different kinds of roles. But it wasn't intended to be that way. All right?
Okay, sorry.
So no, but what? No, that's okay. So again, it all proves that woman was on equal standing with man. She was imbued with God's likeness just as he was, and she had just as much potential for spirituality. That's the point of this, is that they were really equal. Okay, so now I want to look a little more closely at how Hashem created the woman. So we're going to get a little more insight into the nature of the woman herself and in the nature of the marital union. Okay, here's the text verse. So, Hashem, God, cast a deep sleep upon the man, and he slept. And he took one of his sides, and he filled in flesh in its place. Then Hashem, God, fashioned the side that he had taken from the man into a woman. And he brought her to the man. And the man said, "This time it is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This shall be called woman, for from man was she taken. Therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother, and cling to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." Okay, so now let's look at this a little closer. Okay, so as in our understanding of the human being, first human being as an androgynous creature, this makes sense, right? Hashem originally created this original creature. And by the way, the commentators explain why this was. Why did Hashem create man and woman as one original creature? They say that so that their original connection should be established. In other words, that the bond between them should be very strong and very real, firmer than the bond between his son and his parents, since she was actually formed from his physical being. So there is this concept that a man and a woman belong together because they were originally one creature. All right? In addition, by the way, Rav Hirsch says, why was she created from his side? Why was she taken from his side? To prove that they were equal. They were equal creations, right? Abarbanel adds to this or explains this by saying, why wasn't Chava taken from Adam's foot? So that he cannot say, I can lord it over you because you're just my foot. And then he continues to say, why wasn't Chava created from his head? For the same reason, from the opposite perspective. So woman cannot say, I am on top of you, I am better than you. She was taken from his side to show their equality. Okay? So he chops Adam in half, and he therefore thereby leaves him incomplete. We discussed this idea that finding your mate now means the process of trying to restore yourself to wholeness, right? Your soulmate, all right? They shall become one flesh, and Adam recognizes this when he says in the pasuk, "This is flesh of my flesh." I recognize, basically he's saying, I recognize we're not two separate individuals. We belong together. That's what he's saying. We belong together because we were originally together. So, okay. And in addition, of course, we mentioned that the soul is also cut in half. Half of it goes to the woman, half of it goes to the man. And therefore, when we really talk about finding our soulmates, it's really literal, right? Of course, we also know from our discussion of the mitzvahs ona that the physical union of the husband and wife is the method by which those two halves come together. So very far from having a negative impression of the physical union, to us, we know that it is the highest expression of unity and union between a husband and a wife. Okay? Okay, now let's get back to the text. So what about this Christian idea of celibacy, right? We talked about how, as opposed to marriage, which is the lesser of two evils, the greater of the two, the greatest sort of ideal state for man would be celibacy, right? Which is why, excuse me, which is why. I would like that, thank you. Which is why Christian priests are are considered a higher level than, all the other sort of people that can't control their urges and have to marry. Thank you. So you want to say that you can reach great spiritual heights by getting married through marriage, fine. But what if I want to choose celibacy? What if I want to be an ascetic, right? Isn't that just as good a way of finding God? So let's see what the Torah has to say about it. Okay, so first of all, again, what does God say? God's words are, it's not, and it's right here in the verse. It's not good for man to be alone. This is God speaking. I don't know how Paul missed this one, by the way, right? In his very selective, right? It's not good for man to be alone. God is speaking and is saying it's not good for man to be alone, right? So, no, excuse me. I'm sorry, I missed something here. Right. So, to the Christian, in the Christian worldview, marriage is the mechanism by which you don't go to hell, right? Not good for man to be alone. It's interesting also, by the way, how do we see this? We see this in a lot of ways. Number one, we see it in the names of a man and woman. Okay, the woman's name Isha, and the word for man being Ish. Now they're very similar words, but there is a slight difference between those words. Ish has something that Isha doesn't, and Isha has something that Ish doesn't. The word for man, Ish, is Aleph Yud Shin. It has a Yud. Woman, in the word Isha, woman, there's no Yud, but there is in the word Isha a Hey. So man has a Yud, and the word woman has a Hey. So if you put the two letters together, Yud and Hey, you get Hashem's name. Okay, right? Meaning what we understand from this is that you can't have godliness, you can't have God without both elements. In other words, together they'll create, with one whole, Ish and Isha, together you have God at your side. So right there we have, in the very words that refer to man and woman, we have the concept of God wants us to be together, because by being together we bring God into the equation and we make the union holy. Okay? Therefore, by the way, we said, the text said, therefore a man shall leave his father and mother and cling to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. So here again, Paul has ignored this pasuk, which is basically the first order that God gave to humankind, right? You have to leave the home of your youth and marry. And not only by doing so, but by doing so you become one flesh. So this is clearly a God-given imperative. Go and get married, right? As if you didn't hear it from your parents enough, When are you going to get married? Okay, so God is also...
I just want to add, I also...
Yeah, go ahead.
I've heard that before about the Yud and the Hey.
Yeah.
When you take those two letters out, you're left with the word fire.
Right, that's right. There are a couple of other ways to understand that is... Yeah, absolutely. A couple other ways to understand that is that when you take God out of the marriage, then you're left with just both man and woman. Isha have now only Aish, which is fire. So it's, in other words, without God in the equation, it's a destructive relationship. Right, okay. That's correct, good. Okay, so let's discuss this idea that being good is not alone. It's not good for man to be alone. That's what God said. Why? Really, if you think about it, the first human being was... he was one creature, right? He was contained male and female. He was self-sufficient, right? So what's not good about that? So now Rav Hirsch actually says a very interesting thing about this. He says, with all the other creations, it says, and God saw it was good, right? He had created the trees, the sun, and God saw it was good, and God saw it was good. There isn't a similar pronouncement about the creation of man and woman. Doesn't say that. In fact, here, as we quoted here, God says that something's not good. In other words, that it's not good that man should be alone. Now, Hirsch explains, he says, this doesn't mean, what does this mean, it's not good for man to be alone? When God says it's not good for man to be alone, he's not talking about, he doesn't mean that it's not good for man. In other words, he's not saying something about what man needs or wants. He's not, in fact, he points to the language. Rav Hirsch said it doesn't say lo tov la'adam lehios. It's not good for man to be. The words actually say lo tov heyos adam. It's not good aloneness it's not good to be adam alone. So in other words, what he's pointing out is there's something essential about the existential state of being alone that Hashem is saying is not good. So it's not like he's saying, well, Adam really wants to be married or he needs to be married, so therefore it's not good. No, he's saying there's something in the state of being alone that is not good. Okay, so what is it that isn't good? What's not good about being alone? So as I said, the original creature was autonomous, right? So seemingly self-sufficient. This creature had everything, didn't need her, according to the Midrash, she didn't need her for reproduction either. Somehow reproduction was possible the way that creature was. So what's not good about being self-sufficient? What's not good about being independent? What's wrong with being one creature that is totally complete in itself? What's good? What's not good about that?
Is it related to the curse given to the snake that he should eat dust? And this is explained that since the snake eats dust, he doesn't have to seek God. He's self-sufficient. He doesn't have to do anything. And so does it mean that a person is less connected to God, to Hashem, if they're alone? Maybe?
Yeah, it is connected to that idea in a way. Of course, we have to understand that there is really no such thing as self-sufficiency. There's no such thing as independence. In fact, there's no Hebrew word for independence. There's no classical Hebrew word for independent. We don't have such a concept. Why? Really, because maybe God wants to teach us we're not, right? We can forget about it. We can think we are self-sufficient, independent, but really we're not. God gives us everything. But if we are this self-contained creature, then we are under the illusion, perhaps, that we are self-sufficient, right? So there is this illusory feeling that I have everything I need, right? But Hashem wants us to perceive ourselves as needing. He wants us to yearn, right? Why? And it is connected to what you're saying here. Why does he want us to yearn for something? Why does Hashem not want us to perceive ourselves as independent? What do you think? What's wrong about our perception that we can do it all? Or I have it all, and I'm,
There's no sense of community. The idea of tikkun olam, and that we need to work together.
Kind of. The idea of tikkun olam is I have to do something. I have to give to the world. I have to give to others, right? So when we, of course, when we're put on this earth, we're put on this earth for the purpose of what?
Praising Hashem.
Of what?
Praising Hashem.
Praising Hashem.
Creation for
praising Him, but also, what do we? I mean, we could just then therefore go around saying God is great, and I fulfilled my purpose on earth. There's a little more to it, huh?
God doesn't need us to praise Him.
Yeah, He does.
No, it's for us. He doesn't need it.
That's true. God doesn't need our praise.
Well,
God doesn't need anything.
absolutely, God doesn't need anything. But
it is for us. Elise is absolutely right. When we go around, when we praise like God or when we pray, it is for our sake, not for His. But there's something more than just praising Him that we were put on this earth to do. It has to do with God, but it's not just praising Him. We were put on this earth to imitate Him, to be His representatives on earth. So to copy Him. Now, how do we copy God? What is God's essential nature or so to speak, His personality or His character? What is He known as? If you ask a child, what is God? The child will say, what?
Everything.
Huh? Kind. What does He do? What does God do? He makes the trees. He gave us, huh? He gave us life. He gives us the trees. He gives us food. Right? That's
He's the source of everything.
He's the source of everything. He's a giver.
Why does God need us to imitate him? You could say the same thing as praising him.
Right. Again.
That's how the world functions. Right? I mean, it's our blueprint for how to be in the world.
Right. In other words, it's for us that God wants us to copy him. It's for our sakes, not his sake. But it's for our sake, in other words, because it's our job to make the physical world godly. And so therefore, by the way, there right away is a contradistinction to the Christian idea that spirituality is up in heaven. Our job is to bring it down into the world, right? And therefore, our job in copying God is to bring God into the earthly realm, into the human realm, and to do so for our sake. So again, God is known as a giver, right? He gives us life. The first things we teach our kids when they're 3, as soon as they can understand concept of giving, is we tell them, make a bracha. What is making a bracha? Why am I making a bracha? Because I'm thanking God for giving us the food. God, the trees, who made the trees? God made the trees. Hashem made the trees. So he's known as a giver and as a Baal Chesed. You said being kind. That's his claim to fame, as it were, is doing chesed, kindness for us. So when we want to imitate him in this way, when we want to be ourselves givers, in order to be a giver, you first need someone to give to. But if I'm an autonomous person and I have everything within me that I need, right, then who am I giving to? There's no person that has a lack of anything that needs what I can give. So the first step to being a giver has to be to feel a lack. If I feel there's something lacking, that means I need somebody else to give me something, or something I have to get it from somewhere other than myself. And that's why Hashem says we can't have Adam be alone. It's not good for him to be this one creature. We have to separate them. And that way, each half gives to the other what the other needs, right? So you have a male and female. The male has the masculine elements of his nature, and the woman has the feminine elements of nature, of her nature. And she gives to him that feminine side, and he gives to her that masculine side. And those qualities are complementary because they were originally part of one whole. And in so doing, therefore, they become givers, right? Okay, that's why, by the way, now we can explain why it says a person should leave his parents and cleave to his wife. Because why? When you're with your parents, you are being nurtured by others. You're not giving anything, and you can't. Because you're a taker. God doesn't want people to be takers. He wants them to be givers, right? The only way that happens is if you leave a situation where you yourself are being given things, being nurtured by your parents. Leave your parents. Go to a situation, God says, where you're going to now have to be a giver rather than a taker. Interesting. Isn't that fascinating? Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Or anything, but do you think? I wonder now how we have babies that are created, and sometimes their gender is messed up or their parts are messed up.
Yeah.
I wonder if. I mean, how do we know? But if that somehow is tied to if we were all. Everything.
Yeah.
We're tied together. And that, how does Hashem, how does that get created? That such confusion.
Yeah. Yeah.
That you'd be a female, but you'd be partly male, and it kind of, when you were talking about that, reminded me of these.
And some babies are born with both vagina and a penis.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, how, that's kind of.
Right? That's an androgynous person, right? It's very, yeah. It's a totally different topic. I'm not at all equal to discussing any of that. not at all up to the challenge of addressing such a question. All I can say is that the first thing that occurs to me is that God creates us all differently, and obviously that's a very different situation, but it's not any different in a way. From one perspective, it's not any different from, I don't want to say, birth defect or, like someone born without a limb or something. But I mean, it's the same, it's in the same sort of idea of a challenge that we're given, right? Or I'm born with any other the challenges that I have, or, I'm born with a desire to steal, and God says I can't, or I'm born gay. What do I do in any of those situations? It's a challenge that God gives me. I have a talent for singing, me personally, and I am not able to use it. I wasn't able to develop that talent and do what I wanted with it, which was to sing in public, because I can't. God says I can't. The halacha says I can't do that. So I mean, in a sense, we're all born with challenges. We have our personal, so to speak, cross to bear, and lahavdil. I kind of view it that would be my first response as, why does God create an androgynous creature? I'm not an expert on the subject, and I really can't speak to it, but I can speak to it as a person who has other challenges, and all of us have challenges of one sort or another that we wrestle with. So I don't see it as much differently in terms of my personal response to it. Does that answer it at all? Maybe not. I'm sorry. Okay, we're going to finish up on this topic. Okay. Rav Hirsch comments that this is, this creation of a male and female is really different from how all the other creations were made. They were created male and female, but they were sprung from the earth, right? So meaning they really have independent lives. They could. I mean, aside from reproduction, a male animal, a male lion doesn't need a female lion. He can go off and be a male lion. Female lion certainly doesn't need a male lion except for reproduction, because she's the one who hunts anyway and gets the food, right? So they were sprung from the earth separately, but man and woman were not. They were created as one creature. Okay, comments on that. All right. Now talking to the subject of our idea of what happens in marriage, the Jewish view of the equality of man and woman in marriage. Hirsch says, quote, Jewish wedlock, with its ultimate union of man and wife, does not know of such a term as subjugation. All right. So now, what about the pasuk? What about the pasuk, the verse that says to Chava, regarding Chava, your desire shall be for your husband and he shall rule over you. So the Christians, of course, take this to mean he has a natural God-given right to rule over her. Okay, so we explain it, though, a little bit differently. One way of explaining this is that it's not prescriptive, it's descriptive, meaning that, again, things changed after the sin. And this comes after the sin. He is now going to rule over you. So what does it mean? As before, I said before the sin, they were not going to have anything but doing the same job in the same way. But now this describes a relationship where she is going to desire her husband in a way that she didn't before. Maybe there were equal levels of desire, and now there isn't. And therefore, because of this desire, she sort of, longs for him in a way that puts him at an advantage over her, is what we could say about that. That because she desires him, he is now in a position of a little bit, right, a little bit in an advantageous position. So now, again, it's because of the sin, because before it was easier, but because of the sin, their roles are divided now. There's a division in their relationship that they have to struggle with. Also, because there's no immortality anymore because of the sin, right? So now she relies on him for her immortality, meaning to reproduce. She relies on him. So in a way that it makes her subject to her husband. Hirsch also explains it another way. He says that the job God gave both was addressed to man, but meant for woman too. So in other words, Adam heard the law and then gave it over to her. So she subjects her will to the will of God, but it's as expressed through man. So it's the same job, they have the same job, but the husband has the responsibility for the task that God imposed on both of them. The Zachar, the male, was responsible to carry forth the divine message. So therefore, she is sort of listening to him in that way. Again, another explanation is because of the sin, their circumstances and their powers and their jobs change. As before, he doesn't have to work the field. Now he has to work the field. So what that means is she's reliant on him for her food. So they have different strengths and powers, and as a result, she's more reliant on him. Okay. Just one last thing before we end, which is we hear from our sages a lot of, again, we discussed our sages' attitudes about marriage. I'll give you some quotes. Okay, we have on this side, the Christian side, the woman is, the marriage is the lesser of two evils, the evil being sex, right? Our sages say, Rabbi Lazar said, any man who is not married is not a man. As it is said, male and female had created them. So here he's going back to the original idea that originally they were together. That's the ideal relationship, is together. Rabbi Chia Bar Gamta said he is not a complete man, so far from the Christian idea that it's a necessary evil. And a woman is something that we use, as you pointed out. He's not a complete. Ram Tanchum said, any man who doesn't have a wife dwells without happiness, without blessing, without goodness, without protection, without atonement. Think about how different that is from the Christian idea that she is the farthest thing from atonement. Rabbi Yitzchak said the divine presence does not rest on one who is not married. And the Talmud says only through his wife does a man become a man. For the purpose of accomplishing his mission, woman has to be created. So again, a very different view of marriage than the Christian view. Very different view of the position of woman in marriage and her role in life as well. We'll stop here and we'll continue on this very topic next week. Yes?
Terrific.
Alrighty.